you everyone for your time today. It's nice to see everyone, and we're hoping you're enjoying your Wednesday. We do have a lot of people registered today, so it's going to be a lot of fun. And we want to start things off with that fun side of things with a little icebreaker question. So I just want to ask everybody again, feel free to blow up that chat box. What's your favorite way to recharge? So go ahead and type in that chat box. Let's see some great answers. Maybe, how about you, Jay? Jason, you want to start out with how do you like to recharge there?
Yeah, I'll give you maybe two examples. In the summertime, I love doing basically any sport with my family. So whether it's running or cycling, I love doing activities with people. And then wintertime, same sort of idea. I love to ski with my family or friends. But gardening, beach time.
I'm with Jessica, sleeping. I think that's my best way of recharging too.
I think that's a great reference for today's webinar.
Absolutely. Some more sports in there too. Awesome. Thank you everyone so much for all the engagement. That's great. Fantastic. So yeah, we can kind of get things started. Before we get there, I just want to do a couple little intros. So today's webinar is being presented to you by Bucketlist Rewards, the #1 employee recognition platform, and also by Wellable, an award-winning employee wellness platform and services. So a little bit of housekeeping to start things off. Stay tuned for the end where we can do some Q&A. There's a Q&A tab there, so feel free to ask any questions in there. We'll get to it near the end. Also, your credit will be shown at the end as well and shared, and it will be recorded as well as the slides will be shared with you afterwards. And maybe to start things out, you probably wonder, who is this guy talking to you? So I'm Jerry Mueller. I'm an ex-professional athlete, and I have a passion for company culture. And I'm currently the cultural evangelist here at Bucketlist Rewards. But we're joined by two awesome people today. So let's first of all meet our experts. So our first expert is Jason Lindstrom. He's the founder and CEO of Bucketlist Rewards, one of the leading employee recognition platforms. Jason believes in the importance of employee appreciation that helps companies create success by motivating people to grow and thrive. Jason has had the opportunity to help a variety of organizations roll out effective recognition programs. He's worked with companies like the NBA team Orlando Magic, the Royal Bank of Canada, University of Texas Arlington, and Stanford Hospital. Welcome, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Jaron. I'm really excited both about today's topic and hearing all of Nick's thoughts as well, and of course sharing any insights I can add to the whole topic. So thanks for the warm introduction, Jaron.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Jay. And we're also joined here by Nick Patel. Nick is the founder and president of Wellable, a wellness technology platform that enables organizations to create programs that help employees thrive by engaging them in holistic well-being educational modules and activities. He believes that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and employees and employers benefit when individuals are given the capacity to thrive. He enjoys playing basketball, spending time with his family, and impacting the health and well-being of people across the globe with the Wellable team. Awesome to have you, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So we can kind of hop into it now. I'll go over a quick little game plan before we hop in. So here's a little sneak peek of what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to go over the current state of burnout, why building a culture of health and recognition matters, and implementing wellness and recognition strategies to increase employee happiness. I really want to make sure I double down on the point that today is going to be very interactive. So please type in the chat box. I invite all of your questions in the Q&A. We'll also be asking a bunch of questions throughout, so we'd love to hear your thoughts throughout the presentation. But without further ado, I'll pass it over to Nick and we can get things started.
Great, thanks for having me again. So flip the next slide. Yeah, perfect. Yep. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So before we even talk about burnout, I always try to get a simple, kind of concise definition that gets everyone aligned. I feel when you talk to companies across the globe, burnout and mental health are like the #1 things that pop up, especially in this kind of pre-post current kind of pandemic world. And so the way we've defined it, kind of leveraging other people's resources is a constant state of exhaustion, both mental and physical, due to prolonged stress, right? And so for most people, they can relate to that concept where if you've ever had a really stressful day, how does that impact your life? How does that impact your work? How does that impact you when you get home to your family or just, if you're by yourself, wherever that may be? And imagine if that's just consistent. that doesn't end, right? It's like every single day you wake up in the morning to an inbox full of emails or whatever it is that's triggering your stress, and having that exist for some extended period of time. For many individuals, fortunately, pre-pandemic, that wasn't a thing that they had to deal with. They had stress in the workplace, that stress in, their personal life, but it was not something that was constantly prolonged as by the definition of burnout. And I think with this world that we're living in today, kind of largely driven by the pandemic and this kind of push to work, remotely, is that the number of individuals and employees who define who kind of attest to being burnt out has increased substantially. So just a survey, kind of some results here from a survey from Flex Jobs. 75% of people, say they've experienced burnout. 40% of people said they experienced it during the pandemic. There are a lot of, academic research and things going out there talking about what's causing this. The way I summarize it best is that lines have been blurred, right? If you're working from home, it's hard to know when you're at work and when you're at home, when you're being professional and when you're going to be your personal life. And so whether your company uses Teams, Slack, whatever your mode of communication, when you get that message and it's after, work hours, if you were in the traditional world where you're kind of disconnected, you're able to kind of separate from that and not allow it to kind of permeate or kind of, affect your life. Nowadays, everyone, especially those individuals, especially companies who aren't trying to address this head on, are seeing those lines blurred so much where people feel compelled to respond to a 7 p.m. Slack message, which maybe even the manager doesn't expect you to respond to. Those blurred lines have really had people working more hours, doing more than they've ever had to do, doing it in a challenging environment because many companies went to work remotely without having the infrastructure. It wasn't a decision they thought about for 6 months that, okay, let's implement all these policies and things. They just kind of were thrown into it. So all those kind of compounded in a way that's really increased burnout in a very significant way. So as it relates to the cost of burnout, we think this is a topic that everyone should focus on. There's a reason if you're an individual, why you should care that you're being burnt out, right? If you're an employer, why you should care your employees are being burnt out. It's trying to, oversimplify here, but there's actually health impacts, right? Burnout is a medical condition, right? Defined formally as such, but the impacts are, people with increased depression, anxiety, stress leads to heart disease, increased likelihood of getting diabetes. There's also professional implications, right? When you're burnt out, people burnt out tend not to be satisfied with their job, right? They tend to, despite working more hours, actually have decreased performance, right? So they're trying to feel like they're doing more, maybe they're checking more boxes, but that quality of work substantially goes down. I think companies are beginning to recognize that. That stress often leads to people to become ill, and that results in absenteeism. So they can't show up for work today because they are so exhausted that they are now sick and they can't show up. And that has impacts from a productivity perspective as well. So the costs are so high that employers can't ignore it, right? Again, at the conversations that we have with companies across the globe, it is alongside mental health, and the two are very closely tied together, is the number one thing that companies are talking about and trying to address. And it's especially acute for those companies who are working predominantly from home. So this is just a stat from Harvard Business Review. This is a stat for US healthcare, but you can imagine as it applies to other countries like Canada or Portugal or wherever it may be. The cost is very significant. So the dollars at stake, if there's a reason companies want to get involved with this beyond just it's the right thing to do, there's a strong financial incentive to make sure you manage burnout. So up to $200 billion are spent in healthcare costs related to burnout. That does not include all the productivity or absenteeism costs and things that we discussed previously, just in healthcare alone. So a lot of dollars are here at stake. So it's important just to think about that from a business perspective as you look to optimize your company's success. So we think about burnout the way we think about any kind of chronic disease or any kind of broadly health and well-being initiative, is that it starts with having a culture of health, right? So from our perspective, culture of health means everything you do at a company, well-being is taken into consideration, right? Whether it's a sales meeting, whatever it is, the example I always kind of think about, as a wellness company, we see companies have big kickoff events for our programs. And they have this big health and wellness initiative, and they order a bunch of pizza and brownies for people to eat at the event, right? Not to say pizza and brownies are bad. There's certainly a place for those in your diet and things like that. But there is some misalignment. We're there to talk about health and well-being, and we're not necessarily having a really healthy meal, and we certainly aren't having healthy options, because it doesn't mean you have to exclude certain things necessarily. And so that's just a quick anecdote about how it plays into the context as it relates to burnout. It's when you think about the meetings you have with your employees, how many are you having? What type of workload are you putting? Are you putting policies in place that allow them to disconnect from the professional environment? So everything you do within your company, having a culture of health means there is a component and factor about their health and well-being that plays into that consideration. The distinction I always like to make too, having a perk is not necessarily having a culture of health, right? So there's a big difference between just offering healthy food and then really having a culture of health. So a lot of companies begin to put perks out there, maybe opportunities for mental health resources or whatever it may be, but they're not addressing the underlying cause of what's driving burnout, whatever it may be from a well-being perspective. So thinking about it from a culture of health perspective may end up having more perks, but just because you have a perk doesn't mean you necessarily have a culture of health. And as I noted before, when you don't have strong kind of culture of health, there's misalignment, confusion around what's the focus, and that certainly impacts wellness programs and a whole host of initiatives. So I know during the QA, we're going to talk a little bit about what are really actionable items that people can do to address burnout. So really what I want to focus the last couple of slides on before I hand off to Jaren is to think about how do we avoid it from a perspective of awareness. And so in this case, how do you have managers aware that burnout exists with employees, right? Sometimes how do you have a manager recognize they have burnout within themselves? Because it's not always apparent for those individuals. And when it becomes apparent, sometimes it's too far down the road, right? And so when we think about, what are those signs? Are people, having short attention spans, right? Are really pleasant people being irritable occasionally? Are you seeing people, report sick more commonly? What we always say is rather than always just look for signs of burnout, what you should also ask questions that generate responses that can identify burnout. Ask people, how are they feeling, right? Are they feeling overloaded? On a scale, I always give this question to our colleagues, scale 1 to 10, how do you feel, right? Professionally, personally, everything, just give me a single number and we can talk about it. But looking and trying to proactively get that information out there helps not only just start the conversation, the topic, but then it helps identify who's burning out, is it really endemic within your organization, and things like that. And at the end of the day, it comes from leadership. Individuals often feel compelled to respond to that 7 p.m. Slack message because the CEO sends it out, and everyone feels like, well, this is my professional career is on the line. So there's ways for you from policies, statements like, please don't respond to this, or even waiting to send it out at the most senior levels that has a really big impact. And we're in a data-driven world. So on the next slide, we talk about just how we think about I mentioned for Teams, Slack, there's so many technologies that we're using that they provide data points for you. So, I'll give you an example. Our company, we use Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams has 2 kind of really interesting kind of health and well-being benefits or resources as it relates to burnout specifically. One, it provides intelligence to the most senior people in the company around usage of the platform. So are we seeing people at a company like ours, if we're seeing a huge amount of usage from like 9 to 10 p.m., that is a red flag for us. That is not the type of culture we want to build at our company. And so that information around how many messages people are sending, how engaged are they in the platform, what times are they engaged, are really actionable information for you to understand beyond the signs of burnout and asking the kind of questions to get qualitative data. This provides a little bit of a quantitative perspective. And what I find really interesting about Microsoft, they're not even waiting for companies to use and act on this data. They have Viva out there. So Viva is a email that I get once a day about my usage, and it often gives you reminders about taking a break, go for a walk, do a breathing session. That kind of intelligence mechanism is only getting smarter. So there are multiple things out there just for you to identify burnout, and certainly later we'll talk about policies and things you can implement to mitigate that within the workforce.
Awesome. I think, thank you, Nick, for that great context setting. I think next up, I'm really excited to talk about 4 strategies for engagement and wellness. So Nick talked about some of the costs associated with wellness, burnout, and disengagement. And I'm going to be sharing some of our favorite strategies that we've deployed internally. And in many cases, I've seen them deployed with customers as well. One other note, we try to bring some fresh ideas to the table, and I'm going to be asking you as we go through these slides. I'd love to hear if any of these ideas or tactics are new to you. So let's get into the first tactic, which is to seek to understand the whole person. So in my experience, I think it's really important to truly understand the people you work with. There's a great saying from a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. This is a key to empathetic communication. And personally, following this little rule, I find it makes me a better leader, it makes me a better father, and it makes me a better husband. And I also feel like it's a tool that I've been able to give to my team, and it lifts them up and the people underneath them up as well. So how does this play out? What does this look like? I'm going to talk a little bit about our weekly one-to-one meetings. So across the organization, all team leads will meet with everybody who reports to them on a weekly cadence. So people are getting together on very frequently. And we ask a whole series of questions. We talk about goals. It's kind of a fun and interactive section. However, I wanted to drill down and talk about 3 specific questions that we ask in that meeting where we get to know the whole person. And Nick was actually hinting at a question that we ask here as well. But let's start off with the first question, which says, what's the best thing that happened to you this week, either at work or outside of it? I think it's really important to look at the whole person, not just talk about work. And this question allows people to make it career focused, work focused, or they can bring in what's happening to them in their personal life. Over the months and years, I've had people tell really meaningful stories to me. For example, I had one of our account executives recently tell me that his wife is pregnant after many years of trying. I knew the background story and context. I got a little choked up because it was such a big milestone for him. I've had awesome conversations with other team members about their kids getting scholarships, about people getting married. And in my experience, this is how trust and friendships are formed. So not only do you get to know the whole person, but you get to create these amazing long-term relationships. The next question is the exact question Nick referenced earlier. We also ask it, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you? In my experience, a lot of times we'll walk by somebody like, hey, how are things going? And they might reply back with a fine. A fine can mean fantastic. A fine can mean maybe they're not able to pay their rent. When you ask for a score out of 10, it gets rid of the vagueness and lets you get to the heart of the issue. So as a leader, you could potentially at least understand what's happening in people's lives and potentially kind of reach out and even lift them up and remove the barriers that may be happening either at work or at home. One other really interesting thing I've noticed around asking this question is as you get to know people and as you get them to respond to that question week after week, people have different baselines. For example, some people are naturally just a 7 out of 10 all the time. Some people are 9s out of 10, like myself. However, if people drop from their regular score to quite a bit of a lower score for more than 1 week, that's an early indicator of churn or something really significant is happening. So if they're regularly a 7 and they drop to a 5 for a couple of weeks, as a leader, it's an opportunity to do a deeper dive and help fix those issues, whatever those may be. Next up, I love to talk a little bit about tactic number 2, which is getting your people into their zone of genius. In my experience, one of the best ways to keep people engaged is to get them doing the things they're great at and ideally love to do. And then on the flip side, you want to remove the areas where they struggle. There's a really great book on this called The Genius Zone. At a high level, some of the key takeaways are you want to understand what you're great at and not so good at. And in summary, you're going to be much, much happier and more productive when you're doing things that you love. Of note, I found that a lot of people don't actually know what they're good at, or that there's a bit of confusion or grayness around that. So down at the bottom, there's some reflection questions to help people unlock their zone of genius. And those include things like what activities take advantage of your natural talents, what do you earnestly enjoy doing, and in what scenarios would you say you have an unfair advantage of the competition? And in a few moments, I'm going to be giving a really great exercise on how to unlock this knowledge inside of your team. If you jump to the next slide, perfect. Up on screen is a simple diagram with the 4 quadrants of the different genius zones. So in the bottom left, there's a red section, that's the zone of incompetence. I think a lot of people are more aware of their weaknesses than their strengths. And when it comes to identifying strengths and weaknesses, obviously you want to stay out of the zone of incompetence. If you look to the right, there's a little blue section called the zone of competence. These are things that you're average at. The top left is zone of excellence. What's interesting about the zone of excellence. These are things that you're phenomenally good at. However, you may or may not like these skills. And then lastly, the zone of genius. These are the things you're exceptional at that oftentimes no one does quite like you. If you jump to the next slide, I was fascinated. I've heard a lot of conversations internally and externally about whether people should focus on strengths or weaknesses. There's a lot of data pointing to the value of taking a strength focused approach. And more specifically, I'm always interested in the data to support a use case. So I asked the question, what's the ROI or value of focusing on strengths? And there's some great data, both from Forbes and from Gallup, that talk about a huge ROI about getting people into their zone of genius or even zone of excellence. For example, when you deploy this strategy with your team, you can increase sales by 19%. You can increase profit by up to 29%, and you can lower turnover up to 79% in organizations that suffer from a lot of losing a lot of great people. If you jump to the next slide, perfect. If you want a simple way to deploy this tool inside your organization, we've rolled out this exercise called Love to Do, meaning what do you love to do and what are you excellent at? And below you can see a screenshot of this, and I'll kind of give you a quick walkthrough of how this works. And if you're interested, we're actually happy to give everybody a template of this today. I'll ask that in the chat window in a second. So if you look in the center of the screen, there's the center column says task or work. So you're going to want to start out by either you or having your team fill out that center column. These are all the tasks and work that you might be doing on a daily, weekly, or even a monthly basis. This is a screenshot from my love to do activities. So some of the things I love to do, for example, is creating and communicating vision, recruiting senior people, meeting with customers. Once you list out all the tasks down the center, next you want to fill in the passion column, meaning how much do you actually like said activity on a rating from 1 to 10. Then you can add in your skill level, again, from 1 to 10, 10 being exceptionally good, 1 being very poor. Optionally, you can also add in what's a dollar rate per hour. And then lastly, you can fill in the column to delegate, stop, or continue. So for example, in my case, at the top of my list, I really enjoy creating and communicating vision. So my passion around this is a 9. My skill level I put as a 9. This isn't based upon my own assessment. I actually asked a bunch of people, like, in terms of these skills, what do I do best at? And then if you look at the far right-hand column, I'm able to continue doing this. And then as you scroll down the list, kind of down near the bottom, you see some of the things I'm not passionate about. For example, administration and benefits. My passion around this is only a 3. My skill level, I'd probably rate it as a 0 or maybe a 1. And this is something I'm really keen to delegate. I filled out this activity, and the intention is once you fill it out over the next 6 months, ideally try to delegate out the key tasks that you can. A lot of times leaders will struggle with the delegation because they feel like, why would I want to delegate the tasks that I don't enjoy? But as it turns out, in many cases, a lot of the tasks you don't enjoy, others do love to do. For example, when it comes to administration and benefits, we have a fantastic operations and HR team that love to do this sort of stuff. So quick question for the group, maybe type this in the chat window. Would this be a useful template for you to fill out? Would anybody like a copy of this? Because if so, just type yes into the chat window. And if you do want to, oh, awesome. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, this is something we created internally, and I don't think I've ever shown this before in any webinar, so it looks like hundreds of yeses pouring in. Amazing. Okay, we will absolutely share this as a free template and maybe provide a little bit of context on how to roll this out. So thank you for that feedback. Wonderful. Next up, one other kind of fun free tool. I have no affiliation with this or anything. We just had good value from it. If you're looking for a quick, fast way to do a free personality assessment, there's something called a Spark Type. It's just a website. You can fill in your details. You can have your team fill in their details, and it quickly reveals like what are your areas of passion, and then what's one key area you should avoid. I recently had the whole leadership team do this, and there's some really interesting takeaways. For example, some people are natural performers or presenters. Some people are not natural performers or presenters. But understanding people's different strengths or weaknesses allows you to set them up and put them into their zone of genius. So it's a fun little exercise you can do or take away, and there's no cost associated with it. Awesome. So next up, I'm going to talk about one of my next favorite topics, which is mentorship. I'm going to start out by sharing a bit of information around the ROI of this. So Gartner did a really interesting study, and they basically asked, what is the ROI of a mentorship program? And they came back with an average of 600%. Interestingly, we deployed a mentorship program almost from day one in our organization. I was the first one to participate. And we've seen a 3,000% revenue growth over the past 3 years. So not only does Gartner validate this, but personally, we've had some really great successes when it comes to mentorship. So how do you potentially, actually, before we get into the how-tos, maybe again, using the chat window, anybody here have a mentor? Or maybe even more importantly, anyone rolled out a mentorship program inside your organization? It's going to pop up the chat window here. I have a mentor, no. Yes, personally and corporately, wonderful. Okay, cool. So a bunch of no's in there. I think the no's are interesting because this could potentially be an area for you to explore. And at the very least, I'll share some of our kind of top tools, tips, and takeaways. Oh, it's one quick comment. I saw Alicia says, I'm lucky to have my boss who's also my mentor. So absolutely, mentors can come internally or externally. But to kind of show how we did it, perfect. So at Bucketlist, I'm a huge believer of mentorship. Even before I looked into the ROI, what I love to do is avoid the potholes, mistakes, and landmines that others have uncovered. And so in the early days, I really sought out a mentor. I looked for a really strong SaaS leader who had previously built a high growth tech company. And I came across this gentleman named Sasha Williams. I'd just been following him on LinkedIn. Through a whole interesting series of events, we were able to get connected. And I was able to build a friendship at first, and then eventually formalized it more into a mentorship. We became such good friends over the years that he's now joined us as our Chief Operating Officer. But if I was to get into the tactics, tools, and kind of tips on how to deploy this inside your organization, I'll share what we've done at Bucketlist, or I'll share how this program works. So what we've done, I think it's key for staff to apply to this mentorship program. You don't want to drive this down. People should see this as a kind of a top tier benefit. Once somebody applies for the program, we then source a mentor for them. This can be either internal or external, and we do find really, really good mentors, ideally best in class. We're happy to pay for mentorships where possible, but in many cases, there's lots of phenomenally talented people out there who are actually really keen to give back and lift others up. We currently accept 10 mentees into the program per quarter. And also really importantly, it's a mentee-driven program, meaning we have a bunch of tools and templates that the mentee can fill out in advance where they drive the relationship. So the mentor isn't given a bunch of work. They can give feedback and ideally lift people up. We built a mentorship playbook, and we also have a kind of a mentee template that you can use on a weekly or monthly basis, whatever your meeting schedule is like. And again, I'll maybe throw this out as a question to the chat window. Anybody interested in seeing our mentorship playbook or the tools and templates we use internally? Maybe just, okay, awesome. Seeing a bunch of, yes, okay, awesome. I'm proud of you as an audience for considering this as a potential initiative, mostly because I've seen so much benefit from it personally. Awesome, yeses are still pouring in. Okay, next up, we'll talk about tip number 4, and this is my final strategy. And this is just about the importance of recognizing amazing work inside of your organization. So there's a really fantastic statistic that says 79% of US employees leave their job because they feel underappreciated. And if you jump to the next slide there, and I don't know about you, but especially during the Great Resignation, one of the top reasons people quit their job is they don't feel appreciated. They feel capped in their career, and a lot of times they just feel like they're not compensated in a fair manner. But I often hear from people, will recognition work in our workplace? For example, I know I bet some of you out there have a whole bunch of manual laborers, maybe people working, blue collar people working on a manufacturing floor, maybe they're not in front of a computer. Maybe you get the impression that recognition won't work. From my experience, recognition always works because everybody needs to be appreciated and have a sense of belonging. Over on the right-hand side of the screen is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom layer, we have our basic needs like food, water, shelter. Then we have a sense of safety and security. And then the next two layers are actually all about a sense of wanting to be appreciated, loved, and recognized. And that's what recognition does. It addresses those two key layers. And that's why recognition always works. And if you look around the workforce, all the best organizations have recognition programs in place, whether that's Google, whether that's Disney, or even the US military. So how do you deploy a program? How do you get traction and get some wins? Probably one of the fastest, easiest, best ways to do it is through peer recognition. Why is this important? Why is it a good way to go? I often see organizations starting off recognition just leadership driven, which isn't fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but leaders don't see all the great work taking place in your organization. When you allow everybody to recognize one another, you're going to see a lot more recognition taking place, a much higher utilization and engagement. And I've seen all sorts of amazing impacts from recognition. You can lower voluntary turnover by more than 40%. You can increase employee engagement. You can drive sales. You can even increase customer satisfaction. I'm going to make reference to a quick tool or tactic that you can also deploy inside your organization. Nick also mentioned MS Teams. So I know a lot of you right now are using instant messaging tools like Slack or Teams. One of the fastest, best ways to get recognition up and running is just to set up a channel called Recognition. Invite all your team members to participate and ask them, teach them to recognize their peers for living your company core values. And in a matter of days or even weeks, you can have a recognition program up and running, and there's obviously no cost associated with it. Awesome. So those are kind of my key takeaways, tactics, and tips. And maybe I'll turn it back to Jaron to run us through some of the panel questions here.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Thanks so much for both of your input. I was taking notes the whole time, so appreciate all your insights. So we're going to start out with a couple questions now between Nick and Jason. So we want to do a couple panel discussions. So the first one is, if we don't have a culture of wellness and recognition right now, how can we start today? And maybe I'll pass it off to Nick to kind of start off with this question.
Yeah, I'll focus on the wellness piece. I'm sure Jason has a number of comments on the recognition side. It all depends on where you are in this life cycle. So if you really are coming in from a perspective where you at a scale of 1 to 10, you're on the low end of that as it relates to a culture of health or a culture of wellness. From our perspective, it comes down to policies. That's the first place you start. Now, we are a company that sells wellness programs, but we find companies try to reach out and purchase and procure and deploy Wellable a little bit too early, where they just haven't set up the policies in place. And what I mean by that is, let's just take burnout because that's the focus here, but this really applies to almost any really dimension of health and well-being. If you're expecting your employees to be online or be available 24/7 or over the weekends or wherever it may be, then there's no amount of programming or resources you can provide that are going to patch or bandage that up, right? I made a distinction between perks and culture. There's no amount of perks you can offer to offset the fact that people feel they always have to be online, or if the company is contributing to those blurred lines between personal and professional life. Those blurred lines, by the way, happen even when the company's fighting those things, right? Just the fact that people are working from home and what have you, and you have a company in multiple offices across multiple time zones, those things naturally happen. Is a company actively countering and kind of fighting those versus supporting those in some ways by having managers or leadership send out kind of really late messages with expectations on what when people should respond and things like that. As it relates to policies, we talk about this may be an example that is a little bit more on the more extreme side in some way, but we have companies that have no email policies after a certain time, right? Or people can send emails, but they're not expected to reply. If it comes to policies around thinking about culture of health, as you think about your annual reviews, for example, if you're kind of evaluating employee performance, is making sure those meetings discuss and think about the mental health of that individual, right? That's an important element of things you're trying to develop. And so from our perspective, the best place to start is looking internally at policies. They typically cost $0 to implement. They're foundational in terms of being able to build a real program to really move the needle as it relates to employee health.
Awesome. And then maybe I can add just a little bit of color commentary in and around the recognition piece here. So I think Nick made a really good point around setting context and understanding where you're at currently. And when it comes to recognition, one of the best things I'd recommend organizations doing is just to survey your staff. And if you're a smaller company, you could probably survey everybody. And if you're a larger organization, you could just do a cross section or your entire team. And just to find out and ask, like, do you feel recognized for your good work? Are you appreciated on a daily basis? On a scale of 1 to 10, how good are we as an organization are we doing at recognition? Which quickly reveals whether you're doing, in fact, a good job or maybe not so good of a job. From my experience, most organizations actually score pretty low here. And it's nice to have that data to surface to senior management if you ever need to build a business case. So that'd be step one. And if you're looking for a kind of a quick win or tactic to get started today, like if you intuitively have a sense from your team that they don't feel appreciated, or you want to start recognizing some of the fantastic work inside your organizations, one of the fastest ways to do that is to connect recognition to some sort of recurring meeting. So I know a lot of companies will have like a weekly huddle or a monthly all hands or a quarterly fireside chat. Just add an agenda point to the beginning, call it good news, and ask leaders to start recognizing the great work they've seen from their team, to do storytelling. And I think those are kind of two key takeaways people could deploy pretty easily to survey their team and to begin weaving recognition into a regular all hands meeting.
That's great, guys. Yeah, thanks for those first steps. Absolutely. I want to also remind everybody that you can be putting questions into the Q&A tab there, because we're going to be getting to those in a few minutes. So just a quick reminder there. That'll also take us to our next panel question. So for this one, what are some of the best recognition or wellness initiatives that you've seen leaders build into the organization? So maybe we'll start this time with Jason on the recognition side.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Sharon. I'll take it one layer deeper when it comes to recognition. So not only does recognition help lower turnover and increase engagement, it can actually have a huge impact on performance. And what do I mean by that is if you build a recognition program to support your company's key initiatives, goals, or OKRs, you'll see a big lift in performance in those areas. So for example, if your organization cares about customer service, you can build a recognition program around customer service. And I've seen organizations have a huge, really increase their net promoter scores or customer satisfaction scores once they roll programs out. You could build programs around sales awards, around safety. So in summary, you want to understand, you want to align the recognition with whatever the company key goals or initiatives are. This does take a little bit more planning and strategy, but I mean, there's huge benefits to it. And that ends up resulting in the most impactful type of programs. And then one other thing of note is you want to make sure the program is always woven into and fits your company culture. So there's two parts to that. It's important to survey your team, but also have a really strong understanding of how your organization communicates and weave your recognition program into whatever communication tools are being used. So for example, if your organization's hybrid and you use some sort of instant messaging tool, deploy your recognition program into people's favorite tools. If it's a manufacturing organization, you're going to want to weave it probably into some face-to-face meetings. So make the program fit your organization. Those are kind of my top tips around this question.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, Nick, do you want to touch on the wellness side?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just wanted to echo Jason's point. I think, I have a specific example I'll talk about, but it's just really case by case with each company. To your point, if all your communication is happening on instant messaging, that is where you need to house your recognition, right? And things, the story I actually love about, I've heard about this from a wellness program that involves recognition as well, is Southwest Airlines. Everyone may have heard of them, right? They have a ton of traffic, millions of users to their actual website. So a no-cost way that they did recognition that was hugely successful in a wellness challenge they ran. So they ran a wellness challenge about getting people to move more, eat better, sleep better, etc. Winners were going to be featured on the website, right? So when you go to the Southwest website, you have those images of the the plane and maybe flight attendants or pilots, whoever it may be. Those are all real employees, and to be on that website to get that level of recognition that's very public is participating in their employee wellness initiatives. And so there are a lot of the takeaways. Not everyone has a website that's getting 10 million views and things like that. But the takeaway is what's unique to your organization, you can identify, and there's ways you can do it in a free way to recognize those employees. And it's really kind of case specific. So I think the easy low hanging fruit are thinking like Teams, if that's what you're using. But if you just spend a little bit of time thinking creatively about what resources are available in our company that we have, that we even sometimes pay people to be on our website that we can leverage, I think there are a lot of stones that uncovered there and great ways to recognize employees.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. That's a great story. Yeah, getting your face up on a high traffic website like that sounds pretty motivating. Yeah, that's for sure. Awesome. So we do have time for just one more panel question here before we go into the rest. For this one, what makes a culture of health impactful, and what are some ways to make it successful and meaningful? And maybe Nick, if we're okay to start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the list is endless. So I always talk about why companies should have a culture of health. We always say the reason you should have it, and that's kind of the genesis, is it's the right thing to do. Unquestionably, it is the right thing to do. But if you're looking for a business case, it could be around productivity. It could be around retention for employees. It could be about lowering healthcare costs. There's so many different areas. The industry as itself has kind of created this kind of phrase, value on investment. Like, which value are you trying to get from it? It's not a return on investment, because you can get in so many different buckets. And for each company, the thing they value most may differ, but for every company that's really successfully implemented a culture of health, they can tell you endless stories about how they see it firsthand. It's sometimes individual stories that people have incredible, weight loss or health stories and journeys, or people who just feel happier and healthier and more excited about showing up every single day to work. And so it's really, I can go on and on about the list, but if you just even go back to one of my earlier slides about, health and professional, those are just kind of touch the surface of areas where you can just physically see the benefit of having a culture of health.
And I think the only small bullet point I'm able to add to that is, and I'll just reference what we do here internally, is I have this maybe a silly mantra, but I think teams that play together stay together. And in my experience, one of the best ways for people to play together is to do activities, health and wellness type of things. For example, I love running and working out with my team. So I've been on a bunch of runs with people from the ops team and sales team. I've taken different team members skiing, for example. And not only do you get to have a cool, unique experience with them, but you're also kind of leading a healthy, vital life. And at the end of the day, the cheeks are red. Maybe you're having a slightly unhealthy beer, but man, do those experiences bring people together and make work fun and enjoyable. And anyway, in summary, I'd massively echo what Nick said, that there's endless numbers of stories around the impacts of having a healthy culture.
Awesome, thanks, Jason. And we did go to a hockey game as well, so even watching, I think, some activity maybe got us a few cals off. Fantastic. So thanks for your answers there. We're going to kind of wrap things up now. But before we get there, we want to make sure that we are giving value to everybody that's listening. So we wanted to go over some of the key takeaways. So we talked today about how 75% of workers have experienced burnout, about 40% of which experience specifically through the pandemic. So some great information from Nick on those areas. Also, having a culture of health means well-being at the center of every employee's lives. I think there's a lot of great examples that went over there today to do. Also, utilizing wellness and engagement strategies to help your team prevent and address burnout with some real strategies and how to start today. So that was some of the stuff that we wanted to make sure that we covered today. But we want to make sure we get your feedback as well. We're always looking to improve our webinars and learn from our audience. So I'm going to launch a poll question here for everybody to participate in. And we just want to make sure to see which topics really resonated with you the most. So hopefully on your screen there, you're going to see a poll. So go ahead and answer those. We'll love to see the different feedback here. Cool. Yeah, lots of votes. Appreciate it, everyone. Looks like the wellness and engagement, employee wellness engagement's getting up there, number one. I'll leave this up for a couple more seconds. Thanks, everybody, for voting. Oh, a little bit of mix of everything. So that's great. Cool. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and end this poll here for us. And then I'm going to actually pass it over to Jason to chat a little bit more about Bucketlist Rewards. Just on mute there, Jay.
Yeah, I guess in summary, I'm going to sort of change hats here for a moment. And at Bucketlist, we've rolled out recognition programs to a whole variety of organizations, healthcare workers, tech companies, post-secondary schools, hospitals. And I've universally seen a huge lift in employee engagement. I've seen companies build better cultures. We've helped to lower turnover more than 40%. We've driven up engagement. Basically, all the things we've been talking about today, we can help with. And if you want to learn more about Bucketlist Rewards, I just highly encourage you to take advantage and check out a quick demo. We have some really knowledgeable staff who could give you a quick tour of the program. They can also give some additional tools and tactics on how to roll out a recognition program. And Jaron, if you want to launch that survey, would you like to learn more about Bucketlist Rewards? Yeah, I'd highly encourage you to check it out. Give it just click yes to learn more for a short demo. And if you're not interested in Well, that is not interested, that's totally cool as well. I see a bunch of responses coming in. It looks like a whole bunch of people are interested. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks everyone for commenting on that as well. And then I'll also just pass this over to Nick to talk a little bit more about Wellable.
Thanks, Jaron. Yeah, as we mentioned before, we're an award-winning employee wellness platform and services. We're really a comprehensive solution. We think about that in two ways. It's one being touching every dimension of health and well-being. So from the things that we think are most common, there's activity, nutrition, sleep, et cetera, to ones that are more emerging, things that sometimes we talk to HR folks and they're not even thinking about. It's like the science of happiness, purpose, gratitude, sustainability, and tying green initiatives to health and well-being. At the end of the day, our kind of mantra in terms of being comprehensive is offering a variety of different solutions, all kind of as a kind of plug and play, so you pick and choose which one makes the most sense for you. So if you're thinking that you're in that level of you're trying to apply a culture of health, you've thought about the policies that you're trying to implement, and you're at that next stage to wanting to move forward into some formal type of wellness programming, our goal is to offer something for every organization. We recognize what one group does will be wildly different from the next, and we kind of have a modular system to help support companies that do so. If you're interested, I think we maybe throw another poll here, but if you're interested in learning more about Wellable or getting a demo, feel free to just hit yes.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone for hopping in here and voting too. I'll leave this up for a couple more seconds, and then we're getting the home stretch. We'll be able to chat a little bit more with some of your Q&As. Feel free to pop a few more questions in there too. We have some great ones already, but feel free. Right on. So another reason you're probably watching today, I know everyone's always asking about it. So here are your credits. So I'll leave this up for just a few seconds. We will be sharing this as well as the slide deck and also the recording. So keep that in mind. So we'll kind of leave that up there. But again, don't worry if you don't get it down. We'll send it to you as well. And then I did want to finish off with a couple quick questions on our end. Like I mentioned earlier, here at Bucketlist, we are always wanting to improve and give as much value and Wellable as well to make sure that everyone can make sure to have tons of value coming from this. So we wanted to ask a quick poll question with how likely you would to be recommending this type of a webinar to your colleagues. So I'm going to launch one last poll here for you to check out. 10 obviously being absolutely. So we'll spend some time. Just please give us your feedback. Appreciate it. Lots of 10s and 9s. That's good to hear. Glad everyone was enjoying it. Let this run for a little longer. Awesome. And then lastly, just in the chat box here too, I just wanted to ask, in the future, what are some topics that you'd like to be covered? I know we went through a lot today, but we want to make sure that we keep these webinars fresh and new ideas. So feel free to type in the chat box some great ideas too. Awesome. Thanks so much. Mentorship was a good one. Cool. Workplace safety. Yeah, it's a great example. Thanks, Dana. I'll let that run for a little bit longer while we hop into our Q&A to finish things off. So we do have some great questions. Maybe we'll start off with Emma's question here. I think this is more directed towards Nick, but she asked, what is the benefit of having a mental health comfort rounds in the workplace on site? And would that be more successful than offering associates with mental health resources themselves?
There's always the on-site piece I'm kind of gravitating towards, since so many companies have gone virtual or have a hybrid arrangement. We personally, as a company, really believe that having some on-site interaction is really important. So we centralize our workforce across 3 cities: Boston, San Diego, and Bangalore. And because we do value that in-person interactions. When I think about some of these one-on-one conversations that Jason was talking about in his meetings, I found personally that those conversations, when you really kind of get to know someone beyond, the surface level kind of meeting, happen in person, right? We also see feedback from our surveys. So if there's a takeaway here, always each culture is unique, and surveying your employees is a good way to identify what works and what doesn't. We find that people want less Zoom meetings and not more. And so asking them to throw on a one-on-one session, albeit they recognize the value, I think there's some natural desire saying, this is my 6th hour on Zoom. I'd rather, maybe are Zoom fatigued in some of those sessions. So we do find that it's certainly helpful. This kind of goes back to the last comment I'll make between policies and programs. There's a place for both, but there's usually a stage in kind of where you are in that culture or health journey. And I would say the one-on-one rounds is a policy perspective that you have, that managers and leadership are asked to make sure they find time to do these things, or having mental health resources, whatever it may be, is really a program that you're trying to launch. And so if you store in that first bucket, I would say certainly there's no cost to having those rounds. To do it on site or to do virtual is really a decision you make at the company level about how you value those interactions. And if a company really does value those in-person interactions, they probably already have a hybrid policy. If that hybrid policy, or a full on-site policy, if that's the case, I would defer to having those meetings in person.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that. Ajay, anything to add, or are we good for the next question?
I think Nick nailed it. Sorry, great answer.
Yeah, awesome. I actually really found a really interesting question from Anne. We talked, both of you talked about how you kind of scale from 1 to 10 on how you're feeling and trying to get a little more information. Can you both talk a little bit about what happens when that score is low on a consistent basis? Anne was asking, and then strategies from there if people continue to kind of score lower in your ranking. Maybe Jason, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to share context around this. What I would do is, like, let's assume that the low score is unusual. Maybe they're like a 7, 8, or a 9 normally, and they give you a 5 or a 4. What I would do is I want to make it like an open participative conversation. I don't want to force an issue. For example, what I would say is like, hey, I noticed you're particularly low today. Do you want to tell me more about that? Just to make it like a soft way to enter the conversation, because maybe they're feeling bad, but not everybody wants to talk about it in the moment. In my experience, most people, they write down the number because they want to let you know that things aren't going well, and they'll be like, yeah, this is happening. And normally it'll go down 2 branches. It can be a personal issue, or it can be a work issue. Work issues are normally, they're work issues, so they're like highly actionable, and you've now been empowered to help them fix whatever that problem might be. Maybe they're not getting along with a colleague. Maybe they feel stuck in their job. They want a clear career path. Like, those types of issues are highly addressable and fixable, and as a leader, you should then take action on that. If it's a personal issue, there's probably 2 branches you can go down. Sometimes you can just listen and be like an empathetic person, and at least just be there for them. But in many cases, you can also help in their personal life as well. I'll leave that up to the audience. My personal style is like, I just love helping people, and like, if there's anything in my power I can do to help my team, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I think Jason hit the nail on the head. The one thing I would say is, for at least us personally, I had that conversation live. And so it's never, I think people, when they give that number, they're looking to talk about it, right? Especially when they give an outlier number. I feel like it naturally comes out and people want to have that conversation. It kind of, to a certain degree, comes around a culture of health, right? So let's just talk about burnout specifically. If you have a culture of health, talking about health-related issues isn't taboo, whether it's mental health, burnout, wherever it may be. So people feel there's a certain level of stigma that's not there. They feel that there's a certain level of transparency that's appreciated. So when you have that dialogue and give me a 1 to 10, how do you feel? I find that with a culture of health, which is really foundational to whatever you want to develop from a health and well-being perspective, that information comes out naturally. If you find that it's not, then I think that's just a red flag for you to think about really critically. Why is that the case? Do people feel that they're going to be judged for it? Do they feel like there's going to be some implications from a professional perspective? And then you just need to remove those barriers and remove them pretty quickly, if you ask me.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Maybe one last quick question too. They're just asking, Stefania is asking if if the tools are offered in multiple languages, because obviously people are kind of all across the world from the call as well.
I mean, for Bucketlist, yeah, it's a multilingual platform. We have some languages like French, English, Spanish already available on it, and we're rapidly adding tons of new languages to it over the coming weeks and months. So yeah.
Wellable is only in English, but a lot of our platform is for customized content, and modules allow you to build your program. And so all those modules are kind of, the emails you send out are all customizable, the bulletin boards, et cetera. So you're able to kind of adapt it to the language necessary for your population.
Awesome. And so one of the answers and the questions already was people are already using Wellable, which is fantastic. So love to hear that, and everyone on here too. Thanks everyone so much for joining us. I think we're at time now. A huge thank you to Jason and Nick for all the great content, and an even bigger thank you to everyone joining on the call. We really hope you had a good time. It was fun for me and I enjoyed hosting. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody. It was awesome having you join us today.